Intros are so last year. Boss fights. A trend in video games ever since day one, putting your skills to the ultimate test despite how simplistic some of them get. However, as games got into larger ranges of genres, what makes a good boss fight has become a bit obscured. Almost to the point where developers are bound to make bosses that not everyone likes. So, if it's tough to get the idea, this is a personal list of the bosses in video games that I dislike the most. I'm not trying to claim that these are the worst bosses of all time, nor are these factually backed. Because of that, if you happen to like any of these, think that my entries should have been higher, or your most despised boss should be on the list when it's not, all I ask is that you take it with a grain of salt and comment of what your least favorite bosses are, or just make your own list. Not that that's going to really help me, but one game per franchise, only games I played. Let's get started. The first entry takes us to the bullet hell 3D shoot 'em up Sin and Punishment Star Successor. As you probably know, Sin and Punishment Star Successor is a tough game, but it is one that does treat you fairly. It also has bosses that require unique ways of taking down, but they do this while only forcing you to use techniques you've already learned, even if the core gameplay is changed up a little. But do you know how to completely betray that? Put the main character on a tether, take his gun away, and make the attack that's mainly utility the only means of defense while being thrown around like a ragdoll. That pretty much sums up the fist fight with Deco. It's basically a fight with someone who is most likely more skilled than you, and will probably humiliate you. That's already very unneeded for such a short term, betraying all the game is known for, but there's an even bigger problem. You want to keep your distance? He'll immobilize you and counter. You go out of his comfort zone, then quickly go back to his range, he'll mobilize you and counter. You accidentally hover because you slightly tilted the analog, he'll mobilize you and counter you. Now, there is a consistent way of beating him that will take too long to explain, and I was eventually able to actually get good at this boss fight, which is why it's not any higher. But by that time, the damage was already done. God damn it! I'll be honest, I'm not much into the mainstream Japanese role-playing games such as Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy. Don't get me wrong, I still get some fun out of these games and I'll see them for what they are, but I don't nearly like them as much as everyone else. However, the following contains two problems that I see within these titles: poorly made boss fights and unlikable characters. This point goes to none other than Uzuki Yashiro from World Ends With You. But since people like to constantly hound me for pronouncing Japanese anything while reading their characters exactly like they are, I'll just use a nickname given within the game: Pinky. You won't hear me say this often as far as characters go because of how little I use this word, but I freaking hate this brat. She takes away human life for fun and a job promotion. She just treats it as like some sort of game, and if she doesn't get what she wants, she throws a tantrum. Yes, I get it, you have to enjoy your job, but you can enjoy your time off as well. That's not even getting into the actual boss fight. Actually, there's not a lot I need to talk about when it comes to the overall boss fight, except she pretty much has what many gamers would consider incredibly cheap: teleportation, defense down, and self-healing. The game's confusing and unneeded top screen mechanic where your partner is completely stationary doesn't really help either. It also doesn't help when Beat's gameplay is probably the most confusing out of all three. With all of this, you probably won't be beating her the first couple of times. Good thing that the game has an easy mode to get around cheap fights like this, which is probably why I didn't place Pink Tweedledee any higher. Also, do you know how many times you had to fight her? 3! So, speaking of JRPGs and Final Fantasy is a widely talked about series both within praise and the amount of backlash it gets. With a series like this, it's easy to find something I don't like. But my most dramatic experience as far as the bosses go, we'll hop on the Chocobo to Final Fantasy IV. The Demon of the Wind element, Baru Baricia. Woo, try saying that 10 times fast. So, what's the problem with this boss? You know, except for the fact that you have to watch out the drawn-out cutscene every time you lose. Thanks for taking the mood of a death scene, by the way. That was really nice of you. So, Baru Baricia is a typical switch between forms boss. Once she switches forms, her evasion is at maximum, meaning that your moves have such a low chance of hitting that she might as well call this her super amazing invincible form. The only way to counter this form is by jumping with Kain. However, one of her moves is Maelstrom, which randomly targets everyone and can bring their health down to critical. If you mistime your jump, Kain will get into critical, which sucks because Baru Baricia will randomly counterattack one of your teammates once she's attacked by Kain's jump. If she targets Kain in this scenario, pray to God that you can recover from that, since having Kain alive is vital. Speaking of Maelstrom, every time she uses it, she'll attack again with a move that can inflict petrification, a death sentence to anyone who is affected, assuming you don't heal it. So, her fight practically relies on luck. And that's a bad thing. Yeah, no. Because for every problem that fight might have, the Riku fight pretty much has that, except it's worse. So how should I explain this? Well, how about, I hate how he's briefly invulnerable after every move. I hate how he covers a small room with a number of his attacks. I hate how chipping his health is one of the most frustrating experiences in gaming. That frickin' jittery camera angle. And though I give my party shit, they make good distractions, so I hate how you have to fight him alone. And seeing how I'm using repetition to make myself more humorous with rage, I hate how every time you lose, you have to repeat the same cutscene over and over and over and over and over and over. You know, out of the entire game, this is one of few parts that had some decent elements in terms of story. But it's kind of soiled when you have to watch it over and over and over and over and over. You know, that actually felt kind of good. The cult classic Earthbound, a game that has received an excessive amount of popularity over the internet for mainly good reasons. I myself enjoyed this title as I was growing up, though I also oddly found myself caught in the middle to how much I actually like this game. I do rather enjoy its charming setting as well as its dialogue. However, there are just a couple of problems that cause it not to be my favorite Super Nintendo game, much less my favorite RPG. My partially negative opinion lies within the bosses. Most of the bosses I don't hate, just a lot of them felt kind of lacking. However, there was one boss that I just can't stand. Enter Ness's Nightmare, where, surprise surprise, you fight it alone. Not a big deal. I mean, the one-on-one boss fight has been done correctly on several occasions, but it doesn't for this boss. The problem is how it works against the battle system. In case you're not familiar with the battle system, the health runs on a dial in which you have a chance to recover in case you take a blow that will reduce your health down to 0. The most efficient way to beat him is to let him make a fatal blow to you, and as your dial goes down, spam attacks and scroll through the text as quickly as possible until you're near 0 and pop a full recovery spell. After you pop the spell, wait about 2 minutes not doing anything until you're back at full health. It's not tough to do, it's just a very long, boring, and tedious process. And if you think you can nuke him with Ness's best offensive move, as I like to name it, Psi XXX Omega, well, he's completely immune to it. And there's just one tiny detail left. He has a move that works exactly like Flash Beta that causes various status. But it's not the status that's the problem, it's the fact that there's a 15% chance of causing instant death. Which no, doesn't make you stroll through a cutscene again, but makes you go through the entire course again with nothing you can do about it. By the way, nice job rehashing the same sprite from Manny Manny's statue. Never gonna notice that one. imprisoned. Don't get the wrong idea, I actually love Skyward Sword. And despite how typical an entry like this is, there's a little twist. I'm putting just one phase here, which is phase 2. So you're probably wondering, why just the second phase and nothing else? Well, good news to save time, it would explain why I really don't like this boss. You see, the first phase introduces you to this monstrosity and it's a relatively simple but enjoyable fight. The third phase placed in a lot of variety, and though the third phase was better in terms of this aspect, they were both great with atmosphere. The second phase, on the other hand, makes you pull the same stunt 3 times with no change or difficulty added in, with a forced tutorial on a gimmick you could probably figure out by yourself. Something about how short it was until you face it a third time really bothered me as well. It just seemed to suck a lot of the tone and the atmosphere the boss was supposed to create. Let me see if I can explain the situation here. So, you fight the first phase, a large portion of the story takes place. You fight the second, one boss later, fight him again. Try the boss rush because boss rushes can be fun if done properly, and fight Girahim again because Girahim is sexy, and fight the imprisoned again, and fight the imprisoned again. You see where I'm trying to get at? It is one of those ideas I do like on paper, but it doesn't seem like there was a lot of consideration of how this would be a problem. And if it wasn't for the second phase, I feel that I probably would have enjoyed this scenario a lot more. In all constellation though, the third phase does allow you to be a cannonball. Whee! Mega Man. I need to find more time to talk about ya, but some Mega Man games are better left not to be mentioned for reasons why other games in certain other series are best left forgotten. However, this is a negative list, so I've given myself signed permission to talk about it. The game that legitimately killed off an entire side series, killing the sales of Mega Man X Command and Mega Man X8, dispelling all hope for an X9, Mega Man X7 is notorious for a number of reasons. And being a least favorite boss list, you probably see where I'm going with this. Not only does it have slow-paced and rushed stage designs, the Mavericks stand with practically nothing redeemable about them, and shall only be remembered for their voice acting. However, surprise, Flame Nerd is not my least favorite Mega Man boss. Yes, he's annoying, very tedious to beat, but the Water Spear does make the fight really quick, and hey, shut off the volume, and you fix most of the problems. However, I don't think you've seen Red yet if you insist that Flame Nerd really is the worst boss in Mega Man X7. The fight with Red can pretty much be described as such. That gooey substance within a piece of poo. Yeah, I knew what I was getting into when I looked at it, but it's truly disgusting when I dare to touch it. Good analogy. The overall environment pretty much speaks the whole rage-inducing fight for itself. You're on a 3D plane with a bunch of platforms and a bottomless pit giving you the chance to instantly die at any time. Pair this with poor depth perception, a jittery camera, and no drop shadow, and you've got yourself a handful of problems to go along with the insane amount of health he has. But that's leaving out what Red actually does in his attack pattern. The main frustration lies within his ability to teleport from platform to platform. With that, you constantly fight with the jerky camera just so that you can target him. And that's not all. His standard attack is to create projections of himself and attack you, which can pretty much hit you even if you think you dodged it. He also counterattacks any hit you make with a ranged attack, so it's mandatory to not only be far away, but to make sure that you can quickly jump off the platform after you attack him. His worst attack, however, comes after he loses some health and he conjures up tornadoes in which he deals an unbalanced amount of damage if you just happen to be on one of the platforms. With all of this, you'll probably die. A lot. Either that, you'll get dumb luck by wall sliding on the platform to save your life. And by luck, I mean mashing buttons in panic due to awkward controls. And when the easiest way to beat him is to use a character that sounds like this, stop it! You know you're doing something wrong. I'll fully admit, not all of these entries are here because of how frustrating a boss can get, but because of how stupidly disappointing it was. The next entry comes from Lunar 2 Eternal Blue, A criminally underrated classic that would pretty much set the standard for me of what makes an amazing RPG and defines memorable experience. It's something I do want to talk about more in a later time, but let's get to the actual boss. Now, seeing how most of my audience doesn't know about this game, I think I need to explain the situation to set the proper mood. The plot within Lunar 2 is something that won't leave much to the imagination, as it follows a standard epic adventure to save the world. But it's backed up with great presentation that includes memorable settings, amazing characters, and some very well thought out dialogue. Shortly in the game, you will encounter the story's main antagonist, Zophar. Is he the typical sapient being who wants to destroy the world? Yes. Do I love him for it? Oh yeah. Needless to say, Zophar is one of those types of characters who I love to hate. He's consistent, manipulative, certainly intimidating, and hey, he even managed to partially bring out his goal. Eat your heart out, Kefka. All the events that lead to the end of the game are built up so well for reasons I can't explain at the moment. It does, however, make the final fight so satisfying because not only does Zophar put up a really good fight, the amount of tension that leads up to him is brilliant. So after a long and epic boss fight with Zophar, everything is finally over. Except it's not because he has a third phase, and... oh god, what the hell were they thinking? Why is this even here? Alright, some may argue that this is an interactive cutscene, but I say it's a boss, and not a really good one. Where in other games it's just automatically won by tapping a certain button, this phase of Zophar has an HP bar. You can use whatever you like, and he can actually damage you. It's a boss. I don't even need to explain strategy. He has one move that does a small amount of damage in which Lucia with her amazing AI skills will probably heal it off. And when the boss fight itself only has a little bit more than 1k health, it does something to the overall mood. Suddenly all that tension that goes on during the last moments of the game just vanish at the grand finale. With everything I said about the fight itself, how can you take dialogue like this seriously?
You're an asshole!
Also, this has to be a joke, but the music. Now, in other games that play like this, usually the track that plays is rather fitting in order to set the proper mood. But that's not the case here, because you're not going to believe it, but the music that plays is the first boss theme. So it combines silly design, a pathetic battle, and it was completely unneeded. This is something that would have ended perfectly on the second phase, but this is the most pointless fight I've ever seen. It is a good thing it didn't make me turn my back on the ending, and it really was just as spectacular as it should have been. If it did, it really would have been my least favorite boss. I have to be honest, Sonic Generations was a little disappointing for me. Sonic Generations is one of the best games ever, and every Sonic fan should like it, praise it, and think it's perfect because there's nothing wrong with it. I thought it was just okay. Time Eater. Alright, forget about what you think about this game. Forget about what you think about my thoughts on the game. You probably will agree with me that this fight is horrible. But why do we hate him so much? Well, just compare him to any final fight within a Sonic game and you'll get your answer. Not only is the music pretty poor in comparisons to things like Endless Possibilities and Reach for the Stars orchestrated, but there's just a tiny detail that makes this fight that of one from the depths of hell. Let's take an example from a generally liked boss. Perfect Chaos. Now look how the fight plays. You got buildings, and as Sonic is moving, Perfect Chaos appears to be getting closer to you. And when you hit him, Sonic goes all like... then his health goes down. You know what this all contributes to? Feedback. The game acknowledges that you did something right and awards you for your efforts. This is a similar formula that has been implemented to many Sonic games and has definitely worked. Keeping that in mind, and look back at Time Eater, you will probably figure out the huge why it's because there's nothing but space. No, it's quite literally space, and most players would probably mash the boost button seeing that it doesn't work, or get incredibly lucky and beat him in about 2 minutes. And you know you fucked up when you didn't even have the decency to place it in a health meter. His attacks make no sense either. While you're getting pounded by missiles, debris, and arms, the game will give you no indication of how these attacks are punishing you. And what's the point of that attack that slows down time? Speaking of feedback, how about this feedback?
That's a homing shot.
Please be careful, Mr. Sonic! That looks like a homing shot!
Watch it, Sonic!
Careful, Sonic! Sonic, watch out!
It's a walking arm attack!
Listen!
Careful, Sonic!
Time Eater itself is not the only problem. Grabbing the rings will make gathering collectibles in Bubsy 3D look good, because you'll most likely see the rings right after you pass them. So once again, you'll usually grab them out of dumb luck. So have fun with the "you're almost out of rings" beeping sound. And the boss fights were so good in Generations. Dare I say, the best roster in Sonic history. Kind of ironic actually. Sonic tends to have great final bosses and other bosses that tend to have a lot of faults. And now they make great bosses with a terrible final boss. How could you possibly get something like this so wrong? The best thing about this fight was something I made up. It's a game called "What's the Most Fitting Song for This Boss Fight?" This is my candidate.
Come on, run away. You don't have to stay. We're nearly out of time, but you're doing fine. So stay on track and don't look back. Just feel the pace. Come on now, race! Everybody supersonic racing. Try to keep your feet right on the ground when you're supersonic.
Something I've noticed, the more a boss seems to soil something great, the more I seem to dislike it. So I guess it makes sense that my least favorite also is something I view as bad within the series I like. The obligatory Pokemon choice. In this one, we're talking about Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Explorers of Sky. This is a very weird case for me. I want to say it's an amazing game, but I feel it has too many faults to really consider it as such. Does that really make any sense? The immersion is pretty much perfect, and I feel it truly demonstrates what interactive media is capable of. However, prepare yourself for some poor design choices and deaths that don't really feel like your fault, paired up with very bad checkpoints. Because of gameplay issues, the story was what made good bosses. The game had amazing bosses like Dusknoir and Primal Dialga, but there were those bosses that were eh. While playing through the game, I tried to have as much fun as I could, despite that problem. However, there was one boss that caused me so much frustration. There was a boss that made me unprepared and legitimately ruined a good part of the game for me. And though I love this Pokemon, it's because I love this Pokemon that he's also my least favorite boss. And that boss fight is Darkrai. A couple of you might have raised an eyebrow at my choice, so let me be clear. I will admit, it's probably not as bad as some of the other entries in terms of an actual battle, but it's more in terms of how much of a bad taste I feel when thinking about it. Now for the fight itself, Darkrai will begin by summoning 6 other Pokemon. This includes Magmortar, Arbok, Markargo, Rhyperior, Mismagius, and an Aggron. Let me remind you that most of these Pokemon can have potential to hit you hard, yet have low speeds, which in Mystery Dungeon, speed doesn't matter. Let me also point out that most of Mystery Dungeon's area of effect attacks belong in either the fire or electricity category, in which Rhyperior has lightning rods, and most of the Pokemon resist fire, making it impossible to clear them out quickly. And that's not even going into what Darkrai actually does. Right at the start of the fight, he's in range to use Hypnosis, which you falling asleep is one of the worst things that can happen during battle. The other move I need to mention is Double Team. As you know, anything revolving around accuracy gains will make the easiest tasks a total nightmare. With that, when you beat the other Pokemon, no. If you beat the other 6 Pokemon, Darkrai might have spammed Double Team enough so that you can't even touch him. And to top that off, it's complemented with the ability to randomly cancel out your moves. I'm not even joking when I say this, but if you have any hopes of winning, you need to have very specific items just for the sake of abusing cheap tactics. I should also note that you're on an escort mission and you have to rely on bad AI. The dungeon itself is very frustrating, and if you lose all your items. You're forced to restock and do the entire dungeon all over again. This is like the Boobian trap from Mega Man 2, and multiply that by 10. But there's a key difference. Mega Man is a game that's meant to be frustrating. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon is a story-driven game in which you want to proceed through the story. Darkrai just essentially stops the story completely right at the end, in which you were probably waiting for throughout the entire playthrough. I think this is where I'm ultimately trying to get at. I love the story, I enjoyed all the build-up, and I love Darkrai, but the fight itself is just simply poo. I'd say that's enough to warrant Darkrai as my least favorite boss fight. This is Leedy, and Darkrai deserves a lot better than this.